Homeless boy saves billionaire's dead daughter at her own funeral. Your support absolutely lights up my world. Before we begin today's heartwarming tale, please hit subscribe. It means everything and helps me share more beautiful stories with our amazing community. Here's my promise. I personally reply to every comment because connecting with you brings me such joy. Tell me where you're watching from right now. I can't wait to hear from you. Let's dive into this extraordinary story together. The storm clouds had finally parted just as the mourners began to gather. The afternoon sky hung heavy with the weight of sorrow, mirroring the crushing grief that consumed tech billionaire Vincent Hawthorne's very soul. Standing motionless in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit, Vincent felt his hands shake uncontrollably at his sides. The scent of lilies and incense filled the air, a cloying sweetness that made his stomach turn. Before him lay the unimaginable, his precious 8-year-old daughter Sophia, still and silent in a pearl-white casket lined with the finest silk. Her powder blue dress lay smooth as water, while a crown of baby's breath adorned her auburn curls. She appeared more like a sleeping angel than a child who had departed this world. But departed she had, or so everyone believed with absolute certainty. Vincent hadn't uttered a single word since the previous evening, when the hospital staff had wheeled her away for the final time. His signature on the release documents had been nothing more than a trembling scrawl, his face carved from granite. The physician's devastating words echoed endlessly through his shattered mind. "I'm deeply sorry, Mr. Hawthorne. We exhausted every option." Her heart ceased at 4:23 p.m. The cause? Sudden cardiac arrest from an undetected congenital anomaly. But Vincent had never truly accepted those words. Not in his heart, not in his soul. Now standing within the Hawthorne family's private chapel on their sprawling estate, surrounded by marble walls that amplified every whispered prayer and muffled sob, he found himself unable to look away from Sophia's peaceful face. The weight of his anguish pressed against his chest like a physical thing, stealing his breath, threatening to crush what remained of his sanity. His knees threatened to buckle beneath the overwhelming force of his grief. Then, cutting through the heavy silence, came the sound of bare feet against polished stone. Every head turned in unison. A small boy, appearing no older than 7, stepped through the grand archway with quiet determination. He was African American, barefoot, and covered in dust, wearing faded denim overalls that hung loosely on his tiny frame. A silver locket in the shape of a star hung from his neck, catching the dim light that filtered through stained glass windows. No jacket protected him from the cool air that whispered through the chapel, the sacred space. "Son, what are you doing?" The boy never lifted his gaze from Sophia. "She's not dead," he said simply. His words were soft as a prayer, yet they sliced through every conversation like a blade, stealing the breath from every person present. Gasps echoed through the sacred space, bouncing off the vaulted ceiling. A woman's purse clattered to the floor with a sharp crack. The funeral director stumbled backward in shock, his face draining of all color. Vincent blinked hard, certain he'd misheard. The blood in his veins seemed to freeze, then surge with desperate hope. "What did you say?" This time, the boy looked directly at him, their eyes locking with startling intensity. In that moment, Vincent saw something that shook him to his core. Absolute certainty, unwavering faith, and a wisdom far beyond the child's years. "She's not dead, not truly, not yet." "Who is this child?" someone demanded from the crowd, their voice tight with fear and confusion. "Where are his guardians?" But the boy remained focused on Sophia, unmoved by the growing commotion that swirled around them like a tempest. His small hand remained steady on hers, as if he were listening to something no one else could hear. "She's breathing, but you can't see it. Her heart beats, but very slowly. It hasn't stopped completely." Dr. Nathan Pierce, the distinguished silver-haired physician wearing navy blue, turned pale as winter snow. He was the man who had signed Sophia's death certificate just hours earlier, his authoritative voice declaring with medical certainty that there was nothing more to be done. Now he stood frozen, his professional composure cracking like ice under pressure. "That's medically impossible," Dr. Pierce stammered, his voice shaking with something that might have been fear. "The child is—" "Do you know this boy?" Vincent interrupted, stepping closer to the doctor with growing suspicion. Something cold and sharp twisted in his gut as he watched the physician's reaction. Dr. Pierce hesitated, his fingers twitching nervously at his sides. "I've never encountered this child before in my life," he said, but his eyes darted away, refusing to meet Vincent's piercing stare. The boy reached into his pocket and withdrew something precious, a tiny wooden bird no larger than his thumb, carved with incredible detail. Every feather was etched with loving precision, and Vincent could see the smooth wear marks where small fingers had held it countless times. "She gave me this," the boy said softly, his voice filled with reverence. "At the park fountain 3 days before her school's field trip. She told me it had special powers." Vincent's heart nearly stopped. Sophia had mentioned the boy with the star necklace who created beautiful things from scraps and twigs. Vincent had assumed she was describing a classmate, another privileged child from her private school. He'd never imagined. "She found me sleeping beneath the old oak tree," the boy continued, his voice filled with gentle remembrance. "She brought me sandwiches and juice. She promised she'd ask her daddy to build homes for kids like me someday." Tears burned Vincent's eyes as recognition flooded through him like a dam bursting. The memories crashed over him. Sophia's earnest questions about homelessness, her insistence on packing extra lunches, her quiet determination to help everyone she met. "That was you?" "Then I witnessed her collapse at the Science Museum," the boy said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Nobody would listen when I tried to help. They pushed me away because I was dirty." Vincent's voice cracked with emotion, each word scraping against his throat like broken glass. "You were there when it happened." The boy nodded solemnly. "They rushed her to the ambulance, and this man," he pointed directly at Dr. Pierce with devastating accuracy, "he declared she was gone. But I touched her hand before they took her. She was still warm, and she whispered something so quietly only I could hear." "That's quite enough," Dr. Pierce snapped, perspiration beading on his forehead despite the cool chapel air. "This child is creating unnecessary distress for everyone present." Vincent whirled around, his voice thundering through the sacred space with a power that made the windows rattle. "No, Nathan. You told me her heart had stopped. Yet, you refused when I requested a second opinion. You insisted I arrange cremation immediately." "She had passed away," Dr. Pierce insisted weakly, his professional mask slipping further with each passing moment. "It was standard medical protocol." "Then explain why her body remained warm an hour after you pronounced her dead." Silence fell like a heavy curtain over the chapel. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Every eye turned toward the casket where Sophia lay, her face serene in the soft light that streamed through stained glass windows. The boy placed the carved wooden bird on Sophia's chest with infinite gentleness and closed his eyes in concentration. The silver star at his throat caught the light as he bowed his head. "She promised she'd return if someone believed strongly enough," he whispered. Vincent approached slowly, his entire body trembling with hope and terror. Each step felt like walking on the edge of a precipice, knowing that what he might discover could either save him or destroy what remained of his sanity. He gazed down at his daughter once more and noticed something he'd missed before, something that made his breath catch in his throat. A single droplet, perhaps a tear, glistening at the corner of her eye. He froze completely, his world narrowing to that single, impossible detail. Did she just... A collective gasp rippled through the mourners like a stone thrown into still water. But before anyone could react further, the boy collapsed beside the casket, his small body crumpling to the marble floor like a discarded puppet. "Someone help him," Vincent cried, dropping to his knees in panic, his expensive suit forgotten as he reached for the child. At that precise moment, as if summoned by some unseen force, a gentle breeze drifted through the open doorway. The sweet scent of spring flowers mingled with the chapel's incense, and impossibly, unmistakably, Sophia's flower crown shifted slightly. Her lips moved. The sound of shock and disbelief echoed through the chapel's vaulted ceiling like thunder. Vincent remained frozen, unable to move or breathe, as if the slightest motion might shatter this impossible moment. His heart hammered against his ribs with such force he was certain everyone could hear it. Her lips had definitely moved. Not once, but twice. He had seen it clearly. For a man who had built his fortune on logic, algorithms and data. Nothing in his orderly world could explain what he was witnessing. Reality itself seemed to be rewriting its rules before his eyes. Did anyone else see that? He choked out, his voice barely audible above the thundering of his pulse. Please tell me I'm not losing my mind. I I think she. A mourner stammered, her eyes wide with terror and wonder, her hand pressed to her heart as if trying to keep it from escaping her chest. Before anyone could respond, Vincent lifted the unconscious boy into his arms. The child was burning with fever, his forehead damp with perspiration, his small body frighteningly light. The scent of dust and exhaustion clung to him, but underneath that was something else, something pure and inexplicable. Get water and blankets immediately, Vincent commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos with the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. The guests, still reeling from shock, sprang into action as if grateful for something concrete to do. But Vincent's attention remained locked on his daughter. As he watched, her chest rose delicately, slowly, then again. The movement was so subtle it might have been his imagination, but he knew, with every fiber of his being, he knew. She's breathing, he whispered, his voice breaking with overwhelming emotion. Dear God, she's breathing. The funeral transformed into chaos. Someone fainted outright, their body hitting the marble floor with a sickening thud. Another guest dropped their crystal glass, which shattered across the stone in 1,000 glittering pieces that caught the light like scattered stars. But Vincent had no attention to spare for the pandemonium erupting around them. His daughter was alive. Call the paramedics now, he roared, his voice carrying the weight of mountains, and summon someone other than him. He pointed an accusing finger at Dr. Pierce, who stood frozen against the wall like a man facing his own judgment, visibly trembling. Vincent, I swear she showed no vital signs. Dr. Pierce's voice was barely audible, the words stumbling over each other in their haste to escape. No pulse, no pupil response, no brain activity. You signed her death certificate. Vincent's voice boomed through the chapel, each word falling like a hammer blow. You told me to cremate my baby girl this morning. I was following established protocol, Dr. Pierce stammered desperately, his professional composure completely shattered. Her vitals were undetectable. The hospital was under tremendous pressure. We needed beds available. Vincent's blood turned to ice as understanding crashed over him like a freezing wave. He remembered the whispers about administrative meetings, the pressure on medical staff, the endless discussions about patient turnover and resource allocation. Dr. Pierce had processed Sophia through the system like paperwork, not a precious child whose every breath was worth more than all of Vincent's billions. You nearly buried her alive, Vincent growled, his voice carrying a fury that made the very air seem to vibrate with menace. The boy stirred weakly in Vincent's arms, his eyes fluttering open like a butterfly testing its wings. The dream, he whispered, his voice thin as gossamer. I saw her. She wasn't ready to go. I needed to bring her back. Vincent looked down at him with wonder, this small miracle of a child who had somehow known what all the medical equipment and expertise had missed. What's your name, son? The boy blinked slowly, each movement seeming to cost him enormous effort. Isaiah. How did you know? Vincent asked, his voice trembling with emotion so raw it threatened to tear his throat apart. How did you know she wasn't truly gone? Isaiah pointed weakly to his star-shaped locket, the silver catching the light as his small hand moved. She gave this to me when I was cold and scared. She said it would keep me safe. Last night, I prayed with it and saw her somewhere dark, crying and begging for someone to hear her voice. Vincent couldn't contain his tears any longer. They fell like rain, washing away the rigid control he'd maintained for decades, leaving him raw and exposed and more human than he'd been in years. This boy, this dusty, homeless child, had perceived what all the doctors, all the advanced medical equipment, all the wealth and knowledge in the world had missed completely. The ambulance arrived within minutes, sirens wailing like banshees in the afternoon air. Paramedics rushed inside, their faces transforming from professional competence to stunned disbelief as they discovered the deceased child, now exhibiting a pulse and body warmth. The impossible had become reality, and reality was struggling to catch up. Sophia was carefully transferred to a stretcher, her small form looking fragile as spun glass against the white sheets. Isaiah was placed on another beside her, their hands somehow finding each other across the space between gurneys. At the hospital, a team of specialists made an extraordinary discovery. Sophia had experienced Lazarus syndrome, an extremely rare condition where someone appears clinically dead but later regains circulation spontaneously. The phenomenon is so uncommon that many physicians dismiss it as impossible, relegating it to medical folklore and urban legends. But it was real. Without Isaiah, Sophia would have been buried alive, trapped in a coffin 6 feet underground, conscious but unable to cry out for help. That evening, Vincent sat vigil beside Sophia's hospital bed, the antiseptic smell of the room unable to mask the miracle that surrounded them. Her fingers twitched slightly, a movement so small it might have been imagination. Then her eyelids fluttered open like butterfly wings emerging from a chrysalis. "Daddy," she whispered softly, her voice the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. Vincent broke completely, sobbing over her small hand as if his tears could wash away the horror of the past days. "I'm here, sweetheart. Daddy never left. I'm right here." In the neighboring bed, Isaiah slept peacefully for perhaps the first time in months, clean, warm, and safe at last. The harsh lines of hunger and worry had softened on his young face, replaced by the peaceful expression every child deserved to wear. Vincent approached the boy's bedside and sat gently, his heart full of a gratitude too vast for words. "You saved her," he whispered, his voice carrying the weight of absolute truth. "You saved my entire world. I promise you'll never be hungry or cold again." Isaiah smiled faintly without opening his eyes, as if he'd been expecting this conversation in his dreams. "She told me you'd say exactly that." 3 weeks later, their story made international headlines, spreading across every major news network and social media platform like wildfire. A tech billionaire's daughter returned from death's door by a homeless boy with nothing but faith. It was the kind of story that made people believe in miracles again, that reminded them of the power of human connection in an increasingly disconnected world. Vincent legally adopted Isaiah, the paperwork seeming almost anticlimactic after everything they'd been through together. Together, they established the Sophia and Isaiah Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to caring for abandoned and homeless children worldwide, ensuring that no child would ever have to sleep beneath an oak tree again. Dr. Pierce resigned in disgrace, later facing criminal charges for medical negligence that would follow him for the rest of his career. But none of that mattered to Vincent anymore. Justice was important, but it paled beside the miracle he'd witnessed. He'd learned something no billion-dollar corporation or boardroom had ever taught him, something that all his success and wealth had somehow obscured. Sometimes life's most powerful miracles come from society's most overlooked souls, from those who have nothing left to lose except faith and everything to gain from believing in the impossible.